What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast. I am Raymond Summerlin. We're going to talk about a ton today, a ton of preseason action. Talk about the Bills. We're going to talk about the Steelers, the Falcons, the Jaguars. We got a bunch on the list to talk about today. Looking at the preseason, thinking, should we be taking something from this or should we not? And the only person to do that with is the one, the only, the Swami of Konami, Mr. Rich Hribar himself. It's been a minute, friends, since we've been on a podcast together. So I'm excited to talk about the preseason, which I know you don't care about at all, and so I'm very interested.
I do. I do. I watch more condensed in a condensed fashion, but you don't never want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as we get more information. But yeah, I'm definitely not someone that's glued to every second of action here. We're going to be watching a lot of football in season, and you and I will be doing lots of podcasts together in season. So we'll make up for the summer of having other guests, and we'll have each other during the regular season.
It's really funny because I brought up the idea of this kind of like, I called it real or fake, and it didn't even occur to me. Didn't we used to do this?
Last year it was a segment. That's what I thought it was for.
I had completely forgotten. Last year doesn't exist in my brain anymore. Like, I've purged it out of my mind. And so I completely forgotten. So we're gonna do some real or fake about the preseason, which I'm definitely excited to do. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention that Rich has been grinding away on the Sharp Fantasy Football Draft Kit. A ton of content in there. The final big series of the year for the draft content is happening this week, in which he talks about how he's drafting each fantasy position, how he's drafting quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. If you're listening to us live here on Tuesday morning, he's already got the quarterbacks posted. The rest of that will come this week. So how he's approaching every draft, that's amazing information for you to know, because I know Rich is really good at this. Rich wins a lot of leagues. And so he's telling you how he's going to be drafting. And, it's definitely worth it. You get the draft kit for 50% off right now using Get Sharp, the code Get Sharp. You could also get 50% off the book if you already have the draft kit as well. Warren Sharp's preview book. So make sure you check that out. You can also bundle everything together. You can bundle the draft kit together with our in-season fantasy content. So you get all of Rich's content throughout the year. His worksheets, a comprehensive preview of every single game of the football season, the football regular season, from Rich Hribar. That's the worksheet. You can check that out as part of our bundle or in-season fantasy package. A ton of content out there from Rich, which I would recommend you read. I read all of it, and it's great. So I can personally recommend Rich's content to you, because I've definitely
You're probably the only person that's read it all. So I assume you're the only person.
I won't lie to you, it's a lot. It's a lot. I've said this before, and I'm not just blowing smoke because Rich is here. If you need to cram and to get ready for a fantasy draft, his tiers are the answer to that question. Like, that is all the content you could ever need to know are his tiers. Everything else that's happening around the site. A lot of that information you could find in the tiers as well. He's pulling the most important stuff for every player, and it's an amazing read. If you're like, oh, I have a fantasy draft this weekend, what I'm going to do on Friday? Don't do your job. Don't work. Read his quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight end tiers, and you will be ready for your fantasy draft. I promise you that. So let's get on to the preseason. A couple interesting things happening in the preseason. I want to get started with the Bills wide receivers, because this is a situation that I have been paying attention to and very interested in since the Stephon Diggs trade. Figuring out, okay, what are they going to do? What we thought they might do in the draft, it didn't end up happening. They end up trading back. They picked Keon Coleman, who is a very let's say polarizing prospect. Let's say I think that's a fair thing to say about Keon Coleman. They end up signing Curtis Samuel. They end up signing Marquise Valdes-Scantling, Mac Hollins, who now looks like he's going to have a real role in this offense. There's lots of just odd things happening in this offense, and they're all attached to Josh Allen. And so when you look at all of that, you go, okay, well, I'm going to be excited about somebody here, but I have no idea who to be excited about. I think through 2 weeks in the preseason, who I am excited about in this offense has changed. And I think it's because Keon Coleman has essentially been a full-time player. And even if I'm not particularly excited about Keon Coleman as a prospect, his ability to get open, like, I feel like us just knowing that he's going to be on the field all the time, like, I was kind of out on him a little bit earlier in drafts, even at his more depressed cost. I was like, do we really think this is going to happen for him? Now I think, I think I'm all in on Keon Coleman, and I wonder if that's an overreaction to some of this usage that we're seeing.
I don't think it's an overreaction. I mean, you have a guy that was a borderline first round pick, high second round pick. He has kind of even if you don't like a lot of the shortcomings Keon Coleman, the prospect, has, like, one of the things you seen when you watched him was like, all right, well, this guy can still win in like the old school jump ball game and things like that in the red zone. And that's where like the Bills have like a large void, losing a guy like Gabe Davis that they involved, heavily into end zone targets, maybe more than we wish that they did over the past couple of years. But that's like, if you figure it just a face value, Keon Coleman can like be like a poor man's Gabe Davis, right? And then you have the upside for more if his game kind of hones together. The interesting thing, like you said, is that him, right now they kind of really said like, hey man, it's sink or swim, because this Buffalo regime has not done that with their offensive rookies. I mean, you even go back to Dalton Kincaid last year. I mean, even he was slow played to a degree. He really didn't take off until Dawson Knox got hurt in the middle of the season, and then like we saw his usage change late in the year. But you go back to Gabe Davis, Khalil Shakur, James Cook 2 years ago. Like the Bills have always kind of slow played their offensive rookies. So it's nice to see them saying, like, at least recognizing what they have on hand here and saying, we need something from these wide receivers. Someone has to come and make a plays on the outside for this offense, especially when you factor in like the injury to Curtis Samuel to start the year. So like they have to throw Keon Coleman to the deep end. They just kind of have to.
And especially because it seems like, based on kind of what we've seen the usage, it seems like Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel, they kind of view in the same bucket. And so they're really looking for like those outside wide receivers, and their other options are Valdez Scantling and Mac Hollins. I mean, sorry it didn't work out, all the Chase Claypool fans. Are we done with that now, or are we going to keep doing that for years to come, Rich? Are we finished with the Chase Claypool stuff, or do you think that this is just going to be part of our lives like Martavis Bryant was or
Hey man,
has been
good
this
for
team?
those guys. If they could keep making dollars and keep doing it, hey, who you say? But,
Oh
but
no.
Mac
I want to be
Hollins
very
is
clear.
go ahead.
Oh, I want to be very clear. Chase Claypool keep getting checks. I'm not talking about Chase Claypool. I'm so excited for anybody to keep getting checks. I'm talking about us having to act like it matters when he signs somewhere
Yeah, I hope
for
hopefully.
fantasy. Like that part, like I'm confused by why we continue to do this.
I mean, I just keep waiting for the days where like someone's signing him to be tight end, right? Like to like do the whole Team
The
Butler thing.
Jordan Matthews,
Because that's like the full circle of life, right? Like when the big body wide receiver like is transitioning to tight end, which never works out
JJ Arquigo Whiteside.
either.
Yeah, all of them.
But hey, man, good for your guy, Mac Hollins. I mean, listen, Mac Hollins, like Gabe Davis. I mean, Gabe Davis played so many snaps because he was active in the run game, and that's what Mac Hollins is. Like, if you watch the Bills, the back half of the year, and I know that like a lot was influenced from that Cowboys game, but like, I mean, the Bills in totality were below pass rate expectation with Joe Brady. Like they probably are set up to once again try to run the football a lot this year, given what we have, based on the wide receiver position, kind of where the strengths lie in this offense. So, I mean, Mac Hollins could definitely be a guy that plays snaps and runs routes. I don't think he's going to have like a fantasy impact, but the fact that he is like an active run blocker, he's going to be on the field.
Yeah, well, if you expand that a little bit further, if we think they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel, which we do with Dalton Kincaid and with Dawson Knox, and you think that Mac Hollins is going to be on the field, and we don't think he's necessarily a target earner, then you have to think that Kincaid and whoever else is on the field with him is probably going to have to get some targets, right? And that's probably Keon Coleman. And so, like, you expand this out further about how are they going to use their personnel, and that's what has me a little bit worried about Khalil Shakir, who I've been on, all preseason. I have so many, shares of Khalil Shakir in Best Ball Mania, and I'm still fine with it, especially with the Curtis Samuel injury. But like, how many? If he's not used or viewed that way to be used in those big sets, and I mean, even if they're using a lot of big sets, we're talking about like 30% of snaps. So,
Right.
there you are. But even if he's not seen and like is used in those big sets, then like how much fantasy value can be there. So the Curtis Samuel injury, and we'll see how long that lingers, that does help Khalil Shakir out. But what is the ultimate ceiling there versus someone like Coleman, who has a chance to play, 90% of the routes, run 90% a route on 90% of the dropback. So it's a weird situation, and my allegiances have changed a little bit based on kind of what we've seen.
Yeah, I think the Bills in totality, as we look over the course of the season, I think there's gonna be kind of a rotation here, though. I think we're gonna see these guys kind of shuffling it out. It could be a situation very similar to the Chiefs last year, where maybe no one has like a super high route per team dropback rate, right? Like that exists as in the range of outcomes, right? Where like just Kincaid runs the most routes overall on this team. That definitely is in the range of outcomes. It's hard to draw up like many iterations of the way this season plays out for the Bills and Kincaid not to be like the target leader or get a lot of targets. The question with Kincaid is just, do we see his usage change near the end zone? Can we get touchdowns from him? I firmly believe in like on a site like FFPC or like these tight end premium sites, like he's going to catch a lot of passes and get probably the like I said, be the best odds on favorite to lead the team in targets. It's just, can we get the money plays from him? Because that's what the other tight ends all have with the premium draft capital, right? Because without touchdowns, he looks a lot like Evan Ingram, like just a guy that's going to catch a bunch of passes, maybe not in the box. He didn't score a red zone touchdown at all last year. Dawson Knox, had the same amount of red zone expected points as Dalton Kincaid. And you'd say, all right, well, Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs had 25 of those targets. They're gone. How much does Coleman get? They've tried to give him end zone targets in the preseason. He hasn't caught one yet, but he does have 3 end zone targets already in his 2 preseason game sample. So that's the thing with Kincaid, right? Like if you're in a non-tight end premium league, like you're paying an absolute premium for something we haven't like seen. What's the touchdown upside? We know Josh Allen's going to run in touchdowns too. So that's kind of the iron price you're paying for Dalton Kincaid, but it is hard to drop a bunch, like without an injury, drop a bunch of scenarios where it's like he doesn't get a lot of targets. But this offense in totality, like, is something that is I'm kind of sketchy on. I still have Josh Allen as QB1, but I would say if this was ever a year to kind of for him to like kind of snap that streak of being the QB1, this is like the most dangling threads. Like the offensive line's a little weaker. We talk about the receivers, they're being bad. They have our 29th ranked passing schedule. Like there's a lot lining up here to kind of say like, all right, this could maybe not be as optimal as a run out as we hoped.
That's right. It's Lamar Jackson season. I'm glad you've come around to Lamar Jackson QB1 season with me. I'm excited about that. Another interesting situation here is the Chicago Bears running backs, and this is one of those situations where there might be nothing there. And the Bears have a lot of interesting situations. Wide receiver. Do we care about Keenan Allen's weight? We could talk about that in a second.
And who amongst us haven't gone to Chicago and gained weight? Like
I don't even understand the question. Like, aren't you supposed to just gain 20 pounds over the summer? I don't even understand what we're talking about here. But
the deep dish will
with the
stick
running
to you,
backs,
man.
buddy, you get into some of that food.
That's a heavy
that
pizza.
that cheese and sauce. Whew. Like I will. So I'm from Texas. We don't do deep dish down here. We never had. And so I did go up to Chicago one time and I got my first deep dish and I was getting it like I was getting like a normal like pizza.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, this is about how much pizza I would normally eat.
It's like a
I got
lasagna.
through someone should have told me that I was eating a lasagna. I could have better figured out how much I needed to order. It was it was quite a thing. I'll stick to my New York style pizza down here in Texas, or Mexican pizzas from Taco Bell, which obviously is objectively the best kind of pizza. Come at me. Do you eat Mexican pizzas?
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, listen, I love all the Taco Bell variations of all the same ingredients and just presented in a different manner.
I love Taco Bell so much. It's its own food, which I really enjoy. I like anything that it's its own food. It is not Taco Bell is not a type of food. It is not a type of cuisine. It is Taco Bell. And the sooner that people realize that and stop trying to make it Mexican food and just say, no, this is just Taco Bell, the happier I think everybody would be. But on the Bears running backs. So DeAndre Swift, he plays 2 snaps in preseason week 1. He didn't play at all in preseason week 2. You look at that and you go, I guess this means DeAndre Swift is locked in his starting job, and that's probably true. But then in that preseason week 1 game, we saw Khalil Herbert kind of be the lead back. Roschon Johnson hasn't played at all. I came into this preseason, and it's very possible I'm overreacting to everything we're seeing. I came into this preseason actually thinking DeAndre Swift was being a little underrated with the contract that they gave him. I thought that DeAndre Swift was probably going to get more of the work than we expected, even though, I mean, I know there are a lot of people like me that love Khalil Herbert and want to wish cast a Khalil Herbert season. I thought that we were kind of underrating Swift, but then like that usage in preseason week one, I just don't know. I'm a little bit confused about this backfield. What are kind of guess your overall thoughts on this Bears running back situation?
Yeah, it's a little tough, like, right? Like, is it like, could there be some like underlying potential that like they're trying to showcase him a little bit, like trying to get
Yeah.
something in return for him that exists maybe as a non-zero. But then you go back to last year and they kind of really didn't use Roshan Johnson until they had to. And
Yeah.
like he just never really cracked the lineup. And Khalil Herbert, obviously, you're part of the bandwagon. I mean, he's been anytime he's played, he's been a good NFL player. I mean, since he entered the league, he's seventh among all running backs in yards per carry. He's 10th in explosive run rate. Like, this is a good player anytime he's got an opportunity. He just hasn't been able to land consistent opportunity for, various reasons. And he was a good player in college, too, a very explosive back coming out of college. So, I mean, I think there's a very real possibility that Khalil Herbert is just ahead of Roshan Johnson anyways. And he could just be the firm RB2, and there could be a little bit of a potential rotation. With Swift, you're always a little worried about just his landing spot here because the money touches, and this goes back to something we talked about with Kincaid a little bit. Like, Swift is a guy I think that can be effective, but like, how many passes is he going to catch? Like, Caleb is not a guy that is really looking to check down, right? Like, he's a guy that one of these guys that wants to extend plays. He wants to push the ball downfield,
And
and
we've
then
seen that in the preseason too. Like when
Mhm.
we look at his highlights that everybody's getting excited about, those are like they're exciting plays. Love to see it, but like he's going to do that instead of checking the ball down. And so if we're not actively trying to get Swift, catches and like actively with screens and in routes that are designed to go to him as as the first part of kind of the read, then you're really worried about what that upside is as a pass catcher, especially coming off a season in which the exact same thing happened to him with Jalen
Yeah.
Hurts. And it wasn't even that he wasn't getting as many targets. He was not as effective with those targets because of the way that he was being used. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember with Swift. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and then the touchdown stuff, right? Like, Caleb is a guy that in college was heavily involved in like the RPO game near the goal line. So like, how much of that stuff do we see from Shane Waldron? The Bears in totality like haven't really showed us a lot. It feels like they're either working on some stuff or because I mean, Roma Dunze's run the most routes with Caleb this preseason, but they've only been in 11 personnel for 49% of Caleb's preseason snaps, right? And like they're dead last in 11 personnel rate in the preseason so far. They're running a lot of 12. Last year with Seattle, though, like, Shane Waldron was middle of the pack, but like, it's still like when you look at their personnel, it's like they're going to run more than 50% of their plays out of 11. So it's tough to really gauge exactly kind of what's going on. I'm not watching Hard Knocks. Maybe people watching Hard Knocks are privy to this information, but I'm sure they're just showing some like fifth string linebacker that's not going to make the team and trying to get people invested onto that shows terrible. But I mean, it's tough. It's tough to kind of.
I'm glad that we're both anti Hard Knocks people.
I
I
mean, if
have
there
no
were
desire.
two people that were anti-Hard Knocks, it'd be you and I. But it's tough to gauge exactly what the Bears are doing. It feels like they're working on a lot of things. They've got a really great schedule, but they also do have a lot of depth on the offense. Like they can rotate these guys. Keenan Allen is a guy like I just haven't really been drafting. I think the cost has been fine, but like I just have liked the Dunze's price a little bit more into the range of outcomes that he has. Taking as like a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 versus like where Keenan goes in drafts, it's against guys that we know have like locked in targets, like a Deontay Johnson, right? So it's just really hard. The Bears are a tricky team. They've got a lot of things in motion this year. Also, they have a rookie quarterback attached to Shane Waldron, a guy who's kind of let us down. Like not many guys from that coaching tree have let us down pretty consistently, but Shane Waldron's been one of those guys. Like there's an outcome here where maybe we're just all too high on the Bears' potential range of outcomes.
Yeah, and that's tough and there are a couple teams like this. It's tough because I would like to invest in Caleb Williams because I am excited about Caleb Williams and what that upside is. But then I look at all of the options. I mean, with DJ Moore and where he's going in drafts with that target competition that he has. I've not drafted Keenan Allen a single time this year. I will not draft Keenan Allen this year. It's very possible that comes back to bite me because Keenan Allen is or has been a very good wide receiver, but I think that he's been very volume based, and I don't know where that's going to come from in this offense. Roma Dunze, I'm a little more fine with, but also again, like projecting as the third wide receiver. You mentioned them running a lot of heavy personnel. Well, Shane Waldron's got to get Gerald Everett onto the field somehow. He loves Gerald Everett more than anything. Yeah, Cole Kmet is undraftable at this point. If you looked at the usage of what Gerald Everett is what's happening to Gerald Everett, and so yeah, it's tough for me to get excited about any of these pieces, which makes it very difficult for me to get excited about drafting Caleb Williams if I'm looking to stack and do stuff like that. In best ball, it's obviously different in managed leagues and redraft leagues because that's not as important. But yeah, it's been a tough kind of situation to crack here.
And the schedule could be a net negative too. We keep talking about the Bears have they have our number one ranked preseason pass schedule, but like, what if like they are ahead? Like we haven't seen them. Like, what if they're ahead in game script? Right? Like this is like keeps going back to like my Jaden Daniels versus Caleb for fantasy thing. Is like I know the Commanders are going to have to score points. What if the Bears because the Bears have a good defense? They've got a middle of the pack to potentially good offensive line if it comes together, and they have a light schedule. Like, what if they're just like in favorable game script and like they only throw 30 times a game? Like that like exists in the range of outcomes for this team, which is crazy to think about because I know the Bears have been loosey with the football. They've had this kind of the football pulled on them a number of times in recent seasons where they've had a glimmer of hope and then it's pulled back. But I definitely think the way things are lining up, like what if the Bears are just a really good to competitive team? They aren't in a ton of negative game script.
They had a good roster last year. I've said this. Their offensive line was good last year. Like I'm not even like qualifying it. Their offensive line was good. You look at all of the metrics that isolate offensive line play, and they had above average offensive line. It just so happens they were blocking for Justin Fields, who invites pressure and sacks. That's the way that it happens. And if you take a look at their offensive line, the pressure rate allowed from their offensive line in games that I'm going to mess up his name now. Bagent, did I get that right?
Tyson Bagent.
Bagent. The games that Bagent start, if you looked at the pressure rate allowed in those games, it's much lower than in the games with Fields. So like I think their offensive line is good, their defense is good. This roster has been built much better than I think people give it credit for. They continue to think about I'm telling you, that Chase Claypool trade lives large in the minds of people when they think about this Bears front office and what they've managed to do. Chase Claypool, second mention today. Congratulations, Chase Claypool.
And they got it back though. The trade, for they traded back the Panthers.
No, absolutely. And I said this, I think we talked about this after the draft. If those trades flip in people's minds, I think people view this front office a lot differently. It's just that the Claypool trade happened first, and people like, I don't know. You get expectations, and that's how it goes. But either
we
way,
also didn't talk about the running back situation. It looks like they're trying this Velus Jones thing, and who knows how that will in the regular season, what happens.
Here's another one. Yeah. By the way, I'm sorry. Chase Claypool and the Velus Jones third round pick. Was it a third round pick?
It's like a 25-year-old rookie.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. So there were some misses. Nobody's saying there weren't any misses. There were some misses, but I think they've got it in the right spot as long as Caleb Williams hits. Another team that I've been interested in, and I've tried to actually talk about the Broncos offense on two separate podcasts, and you and Warren shut me down one time, and then I just ran out of time last week with Lawrence. But I feel vindicated. The Broncos offense has looked pretty good this preseason, and I want to be very clear. This is just confirming my priors, and so I'm trying not to count everything twice. I want to be very clear about that. Russell Wilson might just not be a very good quarterback anymore, but definitely was an awful fit for a Sean Payton offense. That was true from the second that happened. Bo Nix is a perfect fit for a Sean Payton offense. That alone, no matter what you think about Bo Nix, that alone means that I think they're going to be better this year from a passing perspective. And we've kind of seen that a little bit in the preseason. We've seen Sean Payton mention that, say, he told the announcers in their kind of pre-meeting for this last game that he's excited to have a quarterback. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's something to the effect of he's excited to have a quarterback that's going to, get the ball out on time and run the offense the way that he wants it. And we've seen that when Sean Payton offenses are run that way, they can be very good. And so I'm excited about the Broncos, but that's been true. The other aspect of that is, though, we saw this very similar thing happen last year with Kenny Pickett and the Steelers. I got drawn into that. The Steelers looked much better on offense last year. They ended up being terrible on offense last year. And so I'm trying not to read too much of the Broncos offense, but like, I think that in best ball leagues, looking at Tim Patrick, especially, it's like your last pick makes a ton of sense. You can make really creative Bo Nix stacks in best ball leagues with Dulcich and Reynolds and Patrick without even having to invest anything in the first 100 picks, even if you don't want to go after Sutton. Well, Sutton might not even be in the top 100 picks, but even if you don't want to go that high, you can build interesting stacks. I've been doing that all summer. I'm interested in this offense. I'm interested in Bo Nix in 2 quarterback leagues. We're talking about obviously deeper leagues and deeper formats, but I think this Broncos offense is going to surprise people. And I'll be honest with you, when we do our win totals draft next week, I will definitely end up with the Broncos. I think that this team is a little bit underrated, and I'm getting unreasonably excited about it. And I need you to talk me down, Rich.
I mean, listen, they're going to be better than they were probably offensively a year ago, just based on the inconsistency of Russ's game. Russ, we've talked about it, the James Harden offense, right? Like, layups and 3-pointers. It's hard to have offensive consistency in that capacity. I think that Bo Nix will keep them on schedule a lot more than they were a year ago. I mean, as far as the preseason goes, I'm not going to go crazy. I mean, there's 6 quarterbacks, including Bo Nix, that are 0.010 EPA per dropback or higher, and they're Mason Rudolph, Mac Jones, Josh Dobbs, Bo Nix, Clayton Tune, and Sam Howell. Like, I'm pretty sure that that's
the legend that is Clayton Tune.
Yeah,
you can't discount the legend that is Clayton Tune.
The toughest thing I have from the Broncos, though, from a fantasy stance, with this being a fantasy show, is just how to play it, right? How to play them being better. And you kind of hit upon it. We could take some nibbles on Bo Nix as a QB2, QB3 platoon guy in super flex leagues. But other than that, how are we playing this? This is a team that's going to rotate every skill position. Every skill position they're rotating. This is what Sean Payton does. Also pouring out for Marvin Mims. It looks like he's on the Devery Henderson, Robert Meacham career train. That
my only note on Marvin Mims is R.I.P. Marvin Mims. That's my only note on Marvin Mims. R.I.P. You say they're going to rotate your draft. Are they at wide receiver? Are they going to rotate at wide receiver?
Yes,
because Marvin Mims can't get on the field at preseason.
They will.
It's wild that they don't get him on the field.
We see they play little Jordan Humphrey. They play all. We're not going to see, outside of Cortland Sutton, we're not going to see Tim Patrick log a 90% route participation rate. Like, I guarantee we won't. We're going to see Josh Reynolds. We're going to see Marvin Mims a little bit. Who knows if we'll see, if Troy Franklin gets on the field at all. But at tight end, they're going to play Troutman as a run blocker. They're going to mix Dulcich in on passing downs. Lucas Kroll's going to play. At running back, we're going to see Javonte. We're going to see Jaleel McLaughlin. We'll see if P. Ryan ends up making the roster, or what they end up doing with the depth there. But so at the skill positions, it's just hard to invest in these guys. This is a team that's going to play slow too. Sean Payton offenses have been historically slow. And the schedule's not good. So, I mean, I just don't really know how to play it outside of Bo Nix and Superflex leagues. I mean, you can take some nibbles on Javonte's price if you get the touchdown, production. He's a guy, though, that's going to be very cattywampus. And is this the week, if I play him, does he score a touchdown? Because the weeks where he doesn't score a touchdown, it feels like he could be a little bit hollow of a running back. And you can just punt and just wait till later, get a guy like Gus Edwards or something like that. So it's just very hard to play the situation. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think Bo Nix is the type of quarterback that's just going to keep them more offensively on schedule than they were a year ago. It's just tough to play from a fantasy stance.
Yeah, and that's the point. That's the problem I have, is that I am excited about this offense, but I don't know what to do about it because there are just so many there. And my answer of what to do about it has been to build late in Best Ball Mania, build stacks with Bo Nix and Reynolds and Dulcich and Bo Nix and Reynolds and Patrick, and kind of figure out how we're going to do that. Earlier in the offseason, it was Bo Nix and Mims and Reynolds. And again, RIP Marvin Mims. It was fun while it lasted, I guess. But that's been my answer. But if you're playing in more of a standard size redraft league, it's just, you're not getting excited about it. You're just not. And that's,
there's going to be 3 Broncos drafted in your 12-team league, right? You're getting Javonte and McLaughlin will be drafted and Cortland Sutton will be drafted. That's basically it.
And that also, that's an important thing that I always try to remember once I get to this part of the year, is that normal people are not drafting in May. They're not doing 20 round drafts in May. And so they're not actually thinking about a lot of these there are players that I have drafted that no sane person will think about for the rest of the season. And so it's important to think about things in those terms, even as you get excited. By the way, I mentioned the Steelers and Kenny Pickett last year and how good they were, and then it was just really awful. You wanted to talk about the Steelers first team just being awful this year. I guess if we're taking the transitive property, if the Steelers are awful in the preseason this year, that means they'll be good in the regular season, so maybe we're taking that. But yeah, it's not I mean, it's not been good.
Yeah, it
It
was just
hasn't been good.
yeah, it hasn't been good. The first team offense, regardless if it's been Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, have only averaged 3.5 yards per play. Now Jalen Warren looks like the start of his season is compromised. We're
Yeah,
off to, it's off to a good start.
we're doing great. Things are going well. Feeling good. I mean, we're definitely going to see Justin Fields this year, right?
We're gonna see
Like, there's
both.
no doubt.
I mean, what's
Yeah,
funny is, I was talking to Davis Maddock about this. Like, for the people that have drafted Justin Fields in best ball, like, do you think it's worse for him to start week one than or Russell Wilson? And like, it was kind of unanimously we got to the point. It's like you actually don't want him to start the year.
yeah. No, I want Russ to start the year. I want Russ to start the year and be awful for a month, and then Fields just get the rest of the year. That is the ideal situation. Because if you've just drafted Justin Fields in best ball, I would hope that you have an established quarterback ahead of him that you could trust for that kind of those first at least one, the first first 4 or 5 weeks or whatever like that, and then you hope that you get the Justin Fields experience down the stretch. But yeah, if he starts at some point, he's getting benched. There's no question. He might get benched anyway. If he takes over in week 5, he might get benched in week 10 anyway.
Right.
But
We
at least
might
you
see
have a
it
better
go flip.
chance, I
We
think.
could see it flip
Yeah.
flop. Like, there's definitely that is in the range of outcomes. I mean, that's what we've talked about the all offseason. We just let off about, with the Bo Nix transition from Russell Wilson is the fit for both of those quarterbacks stylistically. And one, there's a reason both those guys were available at the price points they were available for. But stylistically, them in an Arthur Smith offense, like, it's hard for me to envision it. Like, it's been all offseason kind of hard for me to envision how they both kind of gel. And especially with the current context, like how teams are playing defense in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the quarterbacks and you know exactly what they're going to do. And I've just been defaulting to that. Like, we're going to see short passes and deep passes, and the intermediate parts of the field aren't going to exist. And the Steelers, I think, tipped their hand to that when they traded Deontay Johnson, which, I mean, if you have Deontay Johnson on dynasty rosters, you should thank your lucky stars that they traded him, because he would have gotten 7 targets throughout the entire year from these two quarterbacks. But like, it seems to me, looking at that's what they're going to have to do. But you're right. Does that really fit what Arthur Smith's interesting to do? Maybe a little bit. Like, the full Kyle Pitts experience might be what we get here for Pickens. And so, like, I think that you're going to default to what the quarterbacks do. And I think we now know with Russell Wilson that no matter what offensive system he's in, he's going to play like Russell Wilson. And so ultimately, that's what the offense is going to look like, is because that's how Russell
Right.
Wilson's going to play.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it for years. The whole let Russ cook narrative was kind of, hogwash, man. Like, do people still say hogwash? Am I allowed to do that still? Like, is that like a thing? Like, was like
I
is that
do.
still
I do some.
popular?
I don't know. I do sometimes, like, I'll say an idiom and then I'll think about it for a second and I go, wait a minute. Like,
Yeah.
is that where did that come from? That's the terrible history of our language, is that we have
Mhm.
to think deeply about where idioms come from. I don't know if people say hogwash anymore, but I can't think of it being bad. So I think we're okay.
All right, can't
I
get
think we're
canceled
fine.
over it. But I mean, every iteration of the Russell Wilson's offense has looked like the Russell Wilson offense because Russell Wilson, the player, is still Russell Wilson, the player.
Yeah. That's what he wants to do.
And that's the same thing with Justin Fields, right? It's like it's hard to kind of, have that type of player like acquiesce to your system. Like, they're going to do their thing. You kind of have to work inversely around the things they do well. And the least shocking thing of this offseason was Justin Fields looking good in practice. Like, that dude is like a practice player, right? Like, of course he's going to shred in practice. Like, he's an uber athlete. Like, when they're not going full speed and like he's not making the mistakes that, the real game speed has induced Justin Fields to make, he's going to look amazing in practice.
Yeah, and also he's going to be amazing for fantasy when he plays. So, like, for our conversation, it's just, can we get 10 games out of Justin Fields? For my own personal bank account, can we just get 10 games out of Justin Fields, preferably happening in that kind of week 12 to week 17 range? That would be ideal. That's the range where I need Justin Fields playing. Another interesting player to talk about their usage. A couple interesting players going through here as we finish up. Tank Dell. I think one of the more interesting conversations from a fantasy perspective this offseason has been what to do with this Houston passing game. I know you and I both have some reservations about where CJ Stroud is being drafted, but even if you're excited about CJ Stroud, you want to attach to some of his receivers. doing that is very difficult because of how much these three receivers have cost throughout the entire offseason. We've seen Diggs and Dell fall back a little bit. Nico Collins is still very expensive. And then we get in here to the preseason games. And I mean, especially this past week, Tank Dell looked like the clear number 3 receiver in this offense. And you look at, I mean, the Texans were 23rd in the rate of 11 personnel last season, and that was still a much higher percentage than the 49ers, who we know that's where Slowick comes from, and a lot of his offense looked like the 49ers offense. So I assume with these 3 wide receivers, they're going to have to continue to run 11 personnel, but is that really what he wants to do? That's, I think, a fair question. And you think about all that and what Dell's route participation rate might end up being. And I mean, it's getting really tough, I think, to justify taking Tank Dell, aside from the fact that Diggs is coming off an awful season. Injuries can happen, and we've seen Tank Dell on the field be very good. But like, if we're assuming all 3 of these guys are healthy and that Stephon Diggs is kind of Stephon Diggs, then it becomes a little bit difficult to draft Tank Dell where he's being drafted right now, in my opinion.
I think all the Texans in general, it's just been kind of everyone's had one foot in, one foot out, largely on everyone outside of Nico Collins. Everyone just kind of looks at the archetype of Nico Collins and says, "Hey, we'll bet on that at least. He'll be on the field the most, projectable." But like all these guys, even going back to last year, it's tough to find the fit because Dell and Collins only were on the field together for 34% of CJ Stroud's dropbacks last year. That's it. So we didn't even see those guys really play together a ton. And on those snaps, I mean, we saw both Collins and Dell have very kind of wide splits when one or the other was on the field. And now we're adding a third guy to the mix that we know at least is a target earner, even though Diggs fell off last year and he was still earning targets. So, is that something that really it's going to be like a hindrance to him? Is Diggs going to be on the field not earning targets? It's kind of hard to believe that that'll be the case. At least we do know when Dell's going to be on the field, he can earn targets. I mean, we even saw in the preseason, this is one of the tough things about him, right? Is that, he catches like the 30-yard touchdown. He looks explosive. Like he was just open all the time last year. So, I mean, even if they're a team that doesn't run a lot of 11 personnel, like, is it a situation where they run enough to where he's off the field on run plays, right? Is it like another situation where we talk about like the Kelsey splits? Like is his route participation still high, even though they're not running all 11 personnel? That remains to be seen, because this is a team we've talked about with Joe Mixon. Like, they are going to use a fullback. Like, this is another team that's going to use a fullback. It's just part of the DNA of the system. You look at the teams last year that were the lowest rate in 11 personnel. I mean, you had the Falcons, hey, that's changing. They're number 2 in the NFL in preseason 11 personnel. We knew that was going to happen. Sandwich between the Rams and Bengals, two other coaches from the same coaching tree. But then the bottom 2 teams are San Francisco and Miami. That's where Bobby Slowick comes from. He worked directly with Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel. So, like, we know they're not going to inherently run a lot of 11 personnel as a top down from their offense. We know they're going to incorporate a fullback. So it just depends what kind of pass rate can we get from the Houston Texans then, if that's the case, right? How many raw pass attempts can we get? And I think that could be a question, depending if, what kind of jump they take. We're expecting Houston, I think, as a whole and totality to be better, right? To continue to progress and be better. And that division looks like it could be competitive, but also they could be a team that just outright runs away with it as well. And if that happens, is this a team that then goes from maybe 600 to 650 pass attempts to, 550 pass attempts? And then that hurts your wide receiver 3 if you're running not a lot of 11 personnel. But then you look at Dell. I mean, he was a guy that's like tough to invest in. I mean, he had 7 touchdowns as a rookie. His expected total was 3.8. He led all wide receivers in conversion rate of end zone targets for touchdowns with 5 or more. He caught 4 touchdowns from outside the red zone. So like he's just kind of really like hard to like bank on. He's almost Devin Achane-esque at wide receiver. And very similar to that, right? Like, I would almost equate him to being like this year's like almost Devin Achane, but like his price is a lot lower than where Devin Achane's is because of the position he plays and just kind of the way things shake out. But yeah. But I would equate him very much in that. There's definitely a wide range of outcomes for Dell where, like, even on a little bit of opportunity he could hit, but also we want to chase volume firsthand, and he's probably going to be compromised to a degree.
Yeah, that's where I am with Dell. Like, I think if you're betting on Dell where he's being drafted right now, you're just betting on talent, and that's fine. Like, there's certainly reason to do that. Frankly, that's what people are doing with Nico Collins too, who's another player that
Mhm.
I'm having a hard time drafting where he's currently going, because I just don't know. There are lots of good wide receivers up in that range, and we have a lot more faith in the target share of some of those wide receivers being drafted around Nico Collins. That's why Stephon Diggs has always been the value to me. If I'm trying to invest in a Texans wide receiver, it's always been Diggs, because we know that Diggs is a target earner. His price is lower than it otherwise would have been because of how bad he was at the end of last season. And like you said, he was still earning targets at the end of last season, but it was not, it was not the best situation. Did he just hit a wall? I mean, that's certainly possible. That seems unlikely to me that he just suddenly was bad after 7 weeks or whatever it
Yeah.
was of the season. Like, that seems unlikely to me. I would be investing in Diggs. I think I would, if I'm just making rankings, I think I would have Diggs over Collins, because I just trust Diggs as a target earner. And I know that if we look at AJ Pex and all that stuff, they traded for Diggs for a reason. Like, there's certainly something they thought they were missing in this wide receiver room. But ultimately, he would be the one I would invest in. But I'm not particularly excited about drafting any of them at cost. And that's kind of where we are with everybody in this offense, hilariously, except for Joe Mixon,
Yeah,
who,
and
who,
yeah, I mean, and we're well, Stroud. I do think it's a situation where you can, buy the syrup and not
yeah,
the pancakes, and you say, well, Stroud by default is just an arbitrage in all these. But Stroud's so expensive, and the archetype of quarterback he is for fantasy football, paired with cost, has been kind of like a sketchy area to invest in. But I would say, like, in a lot, if you're in like a 2 QB league or stuff like that, like, or if you're in an auction and maybe you can catch value on Stroud, I mean, the way to play it would be through Stroud if you could, but just gamers aren't allowing it.
yeah, Stroud's still expensive as well. It is funny, we've talked about, personally, you and I have talked about Mixon, and Mixon's kind of just being not just a league average kind of running back for years. And here we are, he's found himself into another offense where he's probably going to get goal line carries, and he's probably going to be fine for fantasy. It's a fun
And Cam
situation. You brought
Akers
up
is
Atlanta.
coming, man.
Oh, it's the Cam Akers season, for sure. You brought up the Falcons, which, obviously the 11 personnel, we knew what was going to happen. They're using a lot of that. You brought up an interesting question with the Falcons, which was, why aren't you playing Michael Penix? What does that mean? That was such an interesting decision to not play Penix. And I mean, I Kirk Cousins is probably going to start this whole year. Maybe they look at something in the offseason to see if they could trade him, if they like where Penix is. But like, I'm still on that plane, on that, that train of thought. But I do think it's an interesting thought experiment to say, why exactly wouldn't you play your rookie that you expect to have sit the whole season? Why wouldn't you do that? It's a very interesting question.
I wish I had the answer too, but it was more than what we were given by Raheem Morris. The only thing I can think of is maybe it's just like insurance, like Kirk Cousins insurance. Like they don't, what if Kirk Cousins like isn't fully 100%, or they are worried if something happening and they just don't want to risk a Penix injury. That's all I can really think of. Because like it's truly mind boggling why they wouldn't get this guy work like right now. Like you would think that he would actually just play more at this
Yeah.
point, because you're not expecting him to log a lot of regular season snaps on the surface. So it's a very peculiar situation for sure. Like you see like the Bo Nix stuff, like that, like there's a reason why he's playing so much. Like why is it? But the man Penix should be out there. It's very weird.
I did miss my opportunity to do the Brian Windhorst meme, since he and
Yeah.
I have a very similar physique, and so I did miss the opportunity here to do the Brian Windhorst meme. Why would that be? I don't know. Like, it's a very odd decision. I mean, obviously, we have seen this trend of NFL coaches, and we know where Hugh Morris comes from. And we've seen this trend of NFL coaches not playing players in the preseason. We've seen this continue, them using the joint practices more as like preseason games instead of this. And so I assume that's what this is. But you're right. If you expect this guy to sit for at least this season and maybe longer than that, he's already, a bit of an older prospect given his whole kind of situation in college with the knee injuries and moving from Indiana to Washington and all that stuff. Like, you feel like you would want to get him reps, like that you would want to get it. So it's just a very odd situation. One more guy here to talk about is Jahan Dotson. And I actually mentioned the Commanders last week. We were talking with Lawrence Jackson about offenses that we think will surprise. And I have been all in on the Commanders offense, specifically the passing game with Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin in fantasy drafts and Best Ball Mania and all of that so far this offseason. I've also been all in on drafting Jahan Dotson at his cost. But then Dan Quinn comes out last week and says that the team is still looking for their number 2 wide receiver. And you go, oh no, especially since Dotson, he was bad last year. He wasn't really that good as a rookie. He just scored 7 touchdowns.
You scored touchdowns.
I just call this the diet Jordan Addison. That like people score touchdowns and you don't actually look at the underlying numbers, and it wasn't really that. It wasn't really that great for Dotson. And so you look at 2 years now that it hasn't been great for Dotson, but then you get into the preseason game this past week, and Dotson looks like the clear number 2 wide receiver. And I don't think we expect their defense to be good, even if Dan Quinn can improve it. I think we like Jaden Daniels a lot from a fantasy perspective, which means you want to get some attachment to his receivers. And ultimately, Dotson still looks like the number 2 receiver. So I think, especially now that the cost is even lower than it was, I'm still buying in on Jahan Dotson. But like that statement from Quinn, we're still looking for a number 2 wide receiver. That's rough. That's rough seeds for Jahan Dotson.
If you're in Dynasty, and this is a team that was fully like involved in the Brandon Ayuk conversation for a long for a long time. So like this is not like a surprise. The one good thing for the short term, if you're still taking shots on Jahan Dotson, in your best ball drafts and in these deeper leagues for bench players, that he's gonna be on the field a lot, like regardless. Because, I mean, this is a team that's going to run a lot of 11. They're going to run a lot of 4 wide receiver stuff, too, under Cliff Kingsbury. And, we already seen, like, they've only played, 2 games. But we saw the horizontal raid kind of in full effect, last week. The first game, we had the one drive where we get the bomb from Jaden Daniels, and that's what he could do. Like we saw it with Neighbors and Brian Thomas in college. Like he could push football down the field. So maybe that does give some hopes for like a guy like Diami Brown, who has been kind of stifled his first 3 years in the NFL. It just gives him some opportunities to win downfield. But then the second game, we saw kind of like that full-on horizontal raid, which could be an overall positive for Jaden Daniels, because the one thing that like he had entering the NFL was the Justin Fields scenario, right? Like how much was it just like he got to stand back in pristine conditions, and when every time he was pressured, he either scrambled or took a sack, but he hasn't been sacked on 15 dropbacks so far in the preseason. So like, again, very small sample, but it's at least a point in the right direction that if Cliff's just going to get the ball out of his hands, then you can't really be pressured. Also, you're not going to scramble though in that scenario, which we want him to run around a little bit too, which I think we'll get just inherently anyways. But, John Dotson has been on the field for 14 of 15 of Jaden Daniels dropbacks. The big change is that he's played 92% of his snaps in the slot so far. As a rookie, it was just 28.1% last year. It went up to 39.4%. So maybe this transition to just being a slot receiver is something that can open up some stuff for him. I do think, like I said, with the horizontal raid, we will see a lot of guys incorporated in that area of the field in this Washington offense. We'll see if Luke McCaffrey ends up getting on the field, but guys like Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnott, as he gets ramped up. Ben Sinnott's a guy too, like, we can't just always like try to win week 1 depth charts, right? Like, and Ben Sinnott's a guy you're not going to draft in your home league, like in your home drafts anyway. He's going to be a waiver wire pickup probably at some point. But if you've been drafting him in like these best ball leagues or anything, like you shouldn't fully run away and panic, right? Like you don't have to try to nail the week 1 depth chart on a guy like Ben Sinnott. Like he's a guy that they're probably going to have to incorporate into the offense at some point because they just need more playmakers. The other thing we've also seen Cliff do is the same thing we saw him do to DeAndre Hopkins. Is Terry McLaurin has literally played left wide receiver and not done anything else. He's just lined up on the left side, and they saw this with DeAndre Hopkins, where just like same thing. Like so, Terry McLaurin's literally going to play one position this year. It looks like, because that's what he did with DeAndre Hopkins. So kind of a lot of stuff here going out with the Commanders.
I'm glad you mentioned the not trying to win week 1 depth chart, because this happens with running backs so much. These late round running backs that people are trying to take bets on, whether it's injury or whether
Kimani Vidal got cut last
starter.
week. Twitter cut Kimani Vidal last week. They're like, he's out.
It's wild that these depth charts come out, and a player that you expected to start the season number 3 on the depth chart, Kimani Vidal, is like probably now, to be fair to him, it did seem like he might be a little bit lower, maybe even below Isaiah Spiller. But like, he's a great example of he's probably going to make the team as the third running back, which is what we expected anyway when you were drafting him in the later rounds. And to act like that is somehow a knock on him, you're not drafting Vidal for the first month of the season. You're
Right.
drafting him to see what happens with J.K. Dobbins and what happens with Gus Edwards, and if he can be the starting running back in week 8 and week 9 and week 10 when you
Right.
start to need that when your other running backs have already gotten hurt. And so it's, he's just a great example of this. There are lots of examples of that. They're doing it with Marshawn Lloyd because of the hamstring injury. And it is a concern when a rookie gets that injury, that is he going to be able to just kind of get up to speed? But we also did not expect Marshawn Lloyd to be the starter in week 1. So I'm confused why we continue to do this. And we do it all the time with running backs. And you're right. We can do that now with tight ends as well. And then we completely overlook other week 1 tight ends. Like Colby Parkinson's going to be the week 1 starter at tight end for the Rams. And people just disregard that completely. So I don't even understand. There's no even consistency into how we're doing this with paying attention
It's
to
all
week
just
1.
whatever
And
you want to push me. Whatever fits your narrative, you could just go by that.
I'm just so confused. The whole thing is confusing. I said that Jahan Dotson was last part. There's one more player I want to talk about because his usage has been fascinating, and how much he's played with the backups has been very interesting. And I know PFF's Nathan Yankee. I always say his last name wrong, but he is the preseason follower. Go and follow him. Go and follow his work. He really does a great job with preseason. But he's been mentioning how much Zamir White's been playing with the backups and what his usage has been. And it's an interesting situation for a player that we already had severe usage concerns about as an early down only guy on a team that we didn't really expect to win a lot of games. And now his usage in the preseason, how much he's been playing, has been very interesting. So you had brought him up, and he's definitely a player that I've been thinking about a lot recently.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a guy that fits kind of like the most dead zone profile, right? Like the archetype that we
Yeah.
would typically want to avoid. And just he had such a pure run out last year, but it also like, under context, like doesn't even look that good, right? I mean, you look at he was second in the league in touches the final 4 weeks of the season, but his highest finish was RB12. Like that was that was like the ceiling, is you got like a back end RB1 production. And no one wants to draft the RB18 and RB24, right? Like those are small win gains. Like, yeah, sure, you don't go broke, but like when you're taking picks, like you're thinking about like ceiling outcomes. Like, all right, well, this happened for this player, and then you take the floor outcome if it comes. But like, what's the ceiling outcome for Zamir White? He's a guy that didn't play passing down snaps last year. He's probably not going to play them again now. And then you're counting on game script to kind of float him. And, they're not going to play Easton Stick, Jarrett Stidham, Zach Wilson, and Tommy DeVito again. Like they're not, maybe they play
Hold
one of
on.
those guys again.
With quarterback injuries, you could never say they won't do. Quarterbacks are getting hurt at a wild rate now. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we saw when White was on the field, the Raiders ran the ball 52% of the time last year. With Josh Jacobs, it was just 46% of the time. And then when White was on the field and they were leading, they ran the ball 61% of the time. The only running backs that had a higher rate of rush rate per snap were Najee Harris, Tyler Algier, Kenneth Walker, and Derrick Henry. Like he's a game script dependent back. I forget the actual text that I think Nathan put out. And he put out though, like running backs that played in the third quarter of the preseason, and then like highest fantasy finish like that. And it was like the worst thing ever. So we'll see what shakes out. But he's a guy like I've talked to JJ about this too. Like even though he projects to have like a better floor than guys like say Jonathan Brooks or either the Bengals running backs or either the Titans backs, like I think you just want to take those guys over him because the apex outcome for those other guys is just so much greater. Like you can run into back end like RB2 production that's touchdown dependent and maybe flirts with like high end RB2 production. But like the ceiling outcome for a Pollard or Spears, if one of those guys were to go down, either the Bengals running backs, Jonathan Brooks over the back half of the year, like they're just stronger. They're just stronger profiles. If something were to happen and those guys be a lead back, they would absolutely dust a guy like Zamir White.
Yeah, and I mean that's the dead zone theory, right? Is that what am I missing out? Especially when you consider the replaceability of running back on the waiver wire. Of all of our fantasy positions, the one that's going to show up with the most waiver wire viability is running back. And so if you're saying, well, I'm missing out on a back end running back 2 production for Zamir White, if you're vigilant diligent on the waiver wire, and perhaps get a little lucky, but if you're diligent on the waiver wire, you're going to be able to find that. And so what's the upside here for White? The upside is that he just like randomly scores 18 touchdowns like Jamal Williams. But like, how are you like, what's how likely is that to occur on this team without, let's admit, an improved defense, especially that defensive front is legit scary now that they have Wilkins on there. And so, we'll see what happens. But like, I don't know what the upside here is for White. I feel the same way about every other running back on that team, though. Like, if you're going to get excited about Dylan,
Oh yeah,
again,
no, you shouldn't be thinking like I'm gonna arbitrage the situation. No, it's not one of those either. Because typically you would say like, all right, I'm gonna attach my backup to a guy in the dead zone. I don't think this is either. And we got to pour one out. Like this might just be a reoccurring theme that like if you're like a super diesel running back and like photos come out with you on like a horse or like lifting weights or something, like every one of those guys has failed, man. Like we go back to Andre Williams. You have AJ Dillon. We had Mike Davis quad season. Like these guys, man. It's like you get excited about these photos of them in shorts, and like I'm scared of Zamir White. If I saw him in person, I would never say any of these things out loud to him. But all those guys have failed.
What a horse!
Did you see that picture of him on that horse?
I didn't see.
Dude, I think the horse is riding Zamir White. Like, it's like the dude is yoked.
Wait, so we haven't been, by the way, using our catchphrase of high fat touches. You didn't use it earlier this podcast. So I'm upset. We're gonna have to get back to high fat touches. But the Vladimir Putin backs, the ones that have like pictures on shirtless on horses. That's what we're talking about. All right.
There's a picture of him on a horse, and he is just. I'm terrified.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't seen that. I need to spend more time on that part of Twitter, I guess. All right, that's it for us. We'll be back real soon. We're just going to actually be back on Thursday with a great guest. Make sure you check that out. All of us will be back. There are going to be a lot of us, 4 of us, myself, Rich, Warren Sharp, and Pam Maldonado on the podcast next Wednesday, the 28th of August, doing our win totals draft. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you check that out. You can listen to Sharp Angles, the podcast, wherever you get your podcast. You can hear conversations with Warren Sharp, Mike Clay, JJ Zachary Reason, and more. Follow the podcast, leave a review, set for auto download. We're going to have a lot of content coming up over the next few weeks and in the season, so make sure you check that out. Head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com or sharp.football. You can find Warren Sharp's preview book. You can find our draft kit. You can find a lot of stuff over there, a ton of content to get you ready for the fantasy football season and just the regular NFL football season. So make sure you check all that out, and we'll be back to talk with you real soon.